Welcome to the Health Trip Podcast. My name is Jill Foose. I'm a functional medicine and integrative nutrition health coach. I created this podcast to bring you along as we travel down intriguing, science-packed roads, debunking old medical paradigms and perusing new innovative therapies and modalities with the finest functional medicine doctors, practitioners, and like-minded biohackers while living our best life. Enjoy the show. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Health Trip Podcast. If you've spent any time on Instagram or TikTok lately, you have probably seen it. Peptide therapy showing up everywhere. It's like the next big thing for weight loss and energy and anti-aging, and yes, even menopause symptoms. The before and after photos are compelling. The promises are bold. The packaging is getting prettier, and the price tags steep. But a lot is missing from most of these posts, including the science, the safety, and the truth about what's actually regulated, what's actually studied, and what's actually being sold to you in a vial from a compounding pharmacy you've never heard of, and perhaps even from your licensed practitioner. Midlife women and beyond are navigating menopause in the dark, being dismissed by their doctors, feeling unheard, and are looking elsewhere to help them manage symptoms to reach their health goals. And today I'm talking with Dr. Katherine Johnson to cut through the noise. This episode is for real women like you and me in midlife who are navigating menopause, looking for real solutions and deserve straightforward answers based on science and safety. Dr. Johnson is a board-certified physician in both obesity and emergency medicine and the founder and medical director of Precision Medical Care, a private concierge practice she launched in 2018. And what I love about Dr. Johnson's approach is that she brings over 25 years of clinical experience to the intersection of metabolic health, hormone optimization, and longevity, helping her patients not just feel better, but actually understand why. We did another episode together last year on GLP-1s and obesity and type 2 diabetes. So you should definitely go back and listen to that episode. It was phenomenal. So just a short medical disclaimer before we dive into the story of peptides. By listening to this podcast, you agree not to use this podcast as medical advice or to make any lifestyle changes to treat any medical condition in yourself or others. Consult your own physician for any medical issues that you may be having. And this entire disclaimer also applies to any of my podcast guests. So sit back, open your mind, and let's dive into the world of peptide therapy. Hey, Dr. Katherine, welcome back to the Health Trip Podcast.
Thank you, Jill. It's great to be back.
Yeah, it's great for you to be back to talk about this topic of peptides. It is a hot topic right now on the internet, and just adding to the confusion of menopause for women. So I want to get right into it. What is a peptide? What is the basis of this that menopausal women need to understand?
Sure. So a peptide is how we define how many amino acids go into a sequence of a biomolecule. So hormones are bigger sequences of amino acids. Peptides are shorter, but peptides and hormones tend to do similar things in our body, which means they send messages to other organ tissue, and those messages can change the expression of our hormones. And our body is naturally making hundreds of peptides that regulate our hormones, our immune function, digestion, appetite, sleep, tissue repair. And you've heard of peptides as insulin. There's oxytocin. There are many peptides our body naturally makes. Many people know about glucagon-like peptide or the GLP-1 peptides. Our body is naturally making these hormones, peptide signaling sequences, and many of them are regulating pathways in our body every day. So the thought is, if you can use them as therapy, just like we replace hormones, you can change the molecular signaling and hormone pathway signaling or immune signaling, repair pathways in the body. So they've been widely known about since at least the 50s, and a lot of science has gone into how can we sequence these little peptides in the body and identify, because they have such short half-lives, meaning that the sequence, let's use glucagon-like peptide, for example, the natural half-life of that peptide in your body when you eat and it tells your brain you're full is just a few minutes, so it's gone. So the pharmaceutical companies have found ways to extend the half-life of that signal so that instead of having to take it as a shot once a day, you take it as a shot once a week. So the half-life is extended. Many of the peptides we're hearing about are still under research. They've been flagged in animal studies as really interesting with a lot of potential. And that potential turns into speculation, and there becomes a market for some of these peptides. And I think that's why we're here today to talk about what we know and why we're being marketed to so aggressively all of a
Right.
sudden, even though this has been peptides have been prescribed by doctors such as myself and studied, and we go to Peptide Society meetings and have worked with compounding pharmacies for quite some time and retail pharmacies that offer these peptides as therapies.
Okay, I want to go back to the whole amino acid part that you mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
So if peptides are made from the building blocks of amino acids and someone is deficient in certain amino acids, whether it's, their nutritional choices or sometimes we have to take supplements, because our body, we have to get some amino acids from our food and we get some are produced from our our body makes them. But what about the person who's deficient in amino acids who might not even know they're deficient in amino acids?
Very rare to have someone who's fundamentally deficient in amino acids. Our body's made of all of these proteins. Um, the relative deficiencies and the changes in these peptides do factor in our aging pathways, some genetic predispositions. So, similarly, the building blocks of neurotransmitters like serotonin, dopamine, that also requires our own body's amino acids. So the diet, the nutrition absolutely matter. So the body has all of these molecules to make and keep ourselves healthy. The body is very resilient and continues to express these peptides and hormones to keep us well. And when we're not well, we start having symptoms of disease. And the dysregulation of peptides, if we use the GLP, for example, or insulin. Insulin's a great example because many of us have heard of insulin resistance.
Mm-hmm.
So there's no deficiency of your body's store of amino acids when it comes to insulin resistance. Your body actually makes lots of insulin, the pancreas does. And it's what is that signal doing in the body when the levels have been so high and the receptors aren't accepting the signal and actually reducing the blood sugar, which is what happens in a healthy physiology.
And so we're going to talk about a lot of different peptides, but you mentioned insulin, you mentioned GLP. Are all of the other ones that we're hearing about online also things that our body naturally makes, and then pharmacies or compounded pharmacies and drug companies have figured out a way to make them?
Yes, so once the molecular sequence and the sequence of amino acids is identified by bench research and the chemistry labs, and then they're seen in animal studies and sequenced and said, oh, this is the molecular structure. That structure is an organic compound that can be made in a lab.
Okay, so
How stable that
nothing is made
is a
up.
different story.
Pe-
No,
pep-
they're not making it up. And
okay.
there is clinical activity for many of these peptides. It's just what is the quality of data for how well they've been studied in humans? What's the sourcing of these peptides? Who are they most appropriate
Mhm.
for? That's where it's pretty confusing out there.
Yeah. So let's talk about FDA approval versus compounded pharmacies. When something like insulin or GLP-1 is FDA approved, what does that actually mean?
So for something to be FDA approved, it goes through many different levels and phases of studies. So usually there's a phase one where the molecule or therapeutic is studied in animal studies to see that it has clinical effect and it's safe in animals. And then that's translated to having smaller groups of humans that are tested and make sure it's safe. And so through clinical trials that are randomized, controlled, there's investigation review committees, scientists are really looking for a specific effect of a drug or therapeutic to see what is it doing, is it causing harm, And then the FDA, after it goes through phase 3 clinical trials in human studies and it shows no safety concerns, the FDA can then review that drug, which is brought usually by the drug manufacturing company with their data, and a panel of scientists reviews the data and determines if the drug is in fact safe, if the data is valid, how long the molecule has been studied, for what purpose it's being studied, and then they can offer an approval. The approval means that it can be prescribed, and then any drug that is FDA approved that goes into post-market surveillance. And we know many drugs, it takes maybe thousands of doses or millions of people being studied before more of a signal for safety is seen. So drugs that are newer to market have actually been studied for years, but really the question becomes, how many people were they studied in? How similar are those people to who the patient in front of me is, and how appropriate it is? When I prescribe on label, let's say for GLP, on label for Zepbound, which is tirzepatide, would mean that the patient has a BMI of greater than 30, which is a definition of obesity, or a percentage body fat that requires that. Or they could be overweight with a comorbidity like hypertension, diabetes, prediabetes, hyperlipidemia, sleep apnea. And then I'm prescribing on label. When I'm prescribing off label, it's that the FDA did not say, we approve this drug for this purpose, but because the FDA has approved the drug, I know that it's safe in humans. So as a physician, and most physicians prescribe up to 50% of the medications they prescribe every day off label, which means the dose, the formulation, the condition for which we're prescribing the medication doesn't always line up with what the FDA approved it for. So let's say I'm giving a patient a medication that's FDA approved for weight loss, and the patient maybe only has a few, it doesn't meet formal criteria for BMI, but has 10 pounds to lose that is metabolically inflammatory and can be treated and is 10% of her body weight. I may choose to use the GLP off label to help her lose 10% of her body weight, even though her BMI doesn't qualify. I know as an obesity medicine trained doctor that if she has PCOS, losing 10% of her body weight, treating her insulin resistance is going to help her, even though the BMI doesn't qualify her. So that would still be off label. So most of us have been prescribed medications off label by experts.
Would oral minoxidil be used off label for a woman who's navigating hair loss?
Yes, as I understand it, minoxidil is FDA approved for blood pressure, and the topical formulation is FDA approved for hair loss, but the oral formulation is being used off label.
Right. Okay. So this is when physicians are talking about using medications off label, this is not something that's, this is not woo-woo science. This is grounded in FDA approved medications that have been used on humans and shown safety data for many, many years.
Correct. I'll give you a great example for our menopause audience, and that is vasomotor symptoms of menopause in a woman who is not a candidate for hormone replacement therapy. Many insurance companies will actually insist that the patient tries and fails cheaper medications that are off label to treat her sleep fragmentation, her night sweats, her hot flashes. Those would be like Neurontin, gabapentin, the SSRIs. Those are not on label for vasomotor symptoms. I do have two classes drugs that I can use, Linquit and Veoza. Those are the neurokinin agonists, and that is on-label use. But I also have insurance companies saying we're not paying for that until they try the other meds off-label. So
interesting.
We're in interesting times where we've got economic pressures for prescribing, and we're seeing such, especially this FDA is fast tracking a lot of meds that have been, in phase 3 clinical trials for some time, have a signal of efficacy. And this administration says if it's safe enough and a prescriber is working and giving informed consent with the patient, understands that maybe a lot of patients weren't studied. Let's use VOs as an example. The initial trial was just a few hundred women, right?
Hmm.
And now we have prescriptions of thousands of women, and we're seeing in post-market surveillance, they're going to be putting black box warnings saying, oh, you should check the liver enzymes every 3 months now or every month after initiating therapy. And that's because of the initial clinical trials were not large enough to pick up certain signals. And later, we see signals and we change our surveillance strategies for specific medications.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting. Um, when women are scrolling Instagram and TikTok and they see all of these ads for peptide therapy, which are being promoted for like menopausal symptoms, energy, especially libido and weight loss, body composition
Mhm.
changes, hair and skin, what are we actually looking at? Because it's not insulin and it's not a GLP-1. It's got weird,
Oh,
funky names.
okay. So the ones that most of my patients ask me about are BPC 157. This is body protective compound 157, and it's a peptide that was identified from our gastric acid, our stomach acid, and it seems to be expressed in pathways of repair and blood vessel formation. So, in some animal studies, they showed that this peptide can actually help with wound repair, tendon repair, some soft tissue injuries. And so, speculatively, with some extrapolative, vibes, I would say, we're seeing some doctors have compounding pharmacies make that molecule and say, yeah, we don't have the human data, why don't we try it in humans? And there are some prescribers that have done that. And they may say anecdotally to other prescribers, this helped my patient population, but they didn't study that molecule. There is not a drug company that took the patent for that medication and actually went through the clinical trials and said this works in humans. This is the clinical endpoint. And I suspect that's because the half-life is so unstable and the amount of money required to change a peptide and make it bioavailable, meaning your body can actually absorb it and that signal can be sustained, reproduced, and show a reliable clinical endpoint, takes decades of research and really having something specific for which there's a huge market. So you can get a big drug company like Novo Nordisk, Eli Lilly saying
Hmm.
we're going to put billions of dollars of research because the total addressable market for a GLP is hundreds of million people. So I think with BPC 157, we do have less data. I think people should be publishing the data. But in the meantime, I'm not terribly impressed when people say, I injured this and I took that. In 2 weeks, I got better. Most people get better in 2 weeks anyway. That's
Hmm.
just
Hmm.
typical of any injury to cell tissue. There's also a market where when we're told something will make you feel better and you take it, and whoever's telling you that seems credible to you, and you buy it, that's a for-profit business and they're completely unregulated, and that's was legal, and it was legal to do that as a compounding pharmacy. And the administration said in 2023, the FDA said this, we're taking these all off of a list where compounding pharmacies can make these molecules until we have more data. And that I think was done for safety, but it created a big gray market, black market, if you will, where now we're getting all these research peptides, and there's a whole like multi-level marketing stream of funnels where people are,
Hmm. Hmm.
getting them online, and they're for research purposes only, and that's very
Yep.
clear on the labeling.
Yep.
Um, and it will really actually say on these vials, not for human use.
Yeah,
So,
I want to talk about the placebo effect because it is
mhm.
a real thing. And you're right. When you go to your clinician and the clinician seems incredibly credible and helpful, and you're also paying for cash. I think when people pay for cash, they automatically think they're getting top tier service, top tier advice, and direction and care. And that's not necessarily true. Um, I think it's a red flag when it says for research purposes only. And what the marketers are getting really smart at with peptides is creating beautiful packaging.
Hmm.
Beautiful packaging. All women, we love beautiful packaging. We want our perfume, we want our our lubrication, we want all of our makeup to be beautifully packaged so it sits out on our countertops and it looks beautiful. We want to use it. And I think this is happening in the world of peptide therapy. I have a friend who gets her peptides every month and they come in this gorgeous box with all of this packaging material. You think you were getting like knives from Japan, like it's that
Hmm.
beautiful. Um,
Hmm.
but I think at the end of the day, what you're saying is we have to be really aware that these aren't tested on humans. It doesn't have the data. It doesn't have the FDA approval. And now you can get BPC 157 in pill form. You can get it on Full Script, which is a platform that I use for
Hmm.
my clients
Hmm.
to get their supplements. You don't even need anyone to tell you to get it. You can just go freely order it yourself.
And that speaks to the supplement market is completely unregulated. So a
Yeah.
lot of the peptides are now being called bioregulators and they're being marketed as supplements, which means just like any other supplement you're buying, we should test what's in it and really before you put it in your body. Our government currently does not do that. In Canada, they do. I and most physicians, until I got into functional and integrative medicine, I didn't recommend supplements because I didn't know what the patients were taking. And when I started learning about nutrient deficiencies and supplements and more of this integrative medicine, I test the levels. I work with companies that do third-party testing for the supplements, and I'm checking to make sure it's working. And the suppliers I have for supplements that I offer my patients actually don't put it on the market when their products come and they don't meet their certificates of analysis thresholds. And so there are ways to source supplements safely. In this case, getting it the oral BPC, usually it's with thymosin beta frag. And again, it's from a concept that we think it has potential as a molecule, and there are people who believe in right to try, and then it becomes, well, right to source, and then from whom. And in a cash market, I have the right to buy heroin off the street, right?
Mhm.
To my own detriment. I'm not getting it tested. It's not regulated, and we saw this happen with the legalizing marijuana. It really disrupted a bit of the market on the streets, and now we're seeing it too, where we get more regulation. It's usually good for the end user, but that higher level of regulation comes with a higher cost. And wherever there's a market that's competing for a lower cost, where you don't have to see a doctor. And right now, going to see a doctor takes time. Most of us don't have time. Most of us are having trouble with this job market, economy. We have high deductibles. So access to care becomes challenged. We're in a post-COVID pandemic era where people are a little skeptical about, what the government's approving. They have some
Mhm.
concerns about, things that are FDA approved because we saw what happens with emergency authorization status during pandemic. And, people want more data, which is interesting, right? They want more data. What are the long-term side effects of taking a certain vaccine? But then you've got them shooting themselves up with all sorts of peptides where what's the
Yeah.
long-term data in that? Even what's the short-term data in that? But there are certainly many reports. I've witnessed them myself and seen people get bad reactions from peptides. They're not reporting it to anybody. When my patients have a bad reaction to an FDA approved thing, there's a reporting system to report it, and they look for signal. And if there's enough people who report something isn't right, the manufacturer has to be accountable.
Yeah. I want to talk about another very popular peptide out there. And this one's really interesting. PT 141, bremelanotide. And
Well,
this
it's
is
actually FDA approved.
right. FDA approved.
Yes,
The version
it's
is
Vyleesi is the
Vyleesi.
brand. Hmm.
Yeah. But has it always been FDA approved? Because I used it, I tried it many, many
Hmm.
years ago. It was probably 8 years ago, and I tried it for low sexual desire, and it was
Okay.
a nasal spray. So has this been
Hmm.
FDA approved for a long time?
It has, and that's another thing too, is finding a doctor who even knows about it that will prescribe it is
Hmm.
not easy. So the person who you got it as an intranasal for, I have compounding pharmacies that will make PT 141 intranasally at different doses because the dose of Vyleesi
Yeah.
only comes in one dose for one gender for premenopausal women, even though we know postmenopausal women benefit from therapy too. We actually have data showing men benefit from this. I
Hmm.
prescribe it off label for men as well. And there are different forms of taking it. The intranasal is not studied as is the subcutaneous, but we're again extrapolating that. And we do, compounding pharmacies allow taking the pharmaceutical product of an FDA approved substance and changing the formulation, the dose, and personalizing it. And that's important because many of us don't do well with the only dose that's available. And so, if any of us have had to take care of an animal or a small child who the dose on the shelf didn't work, we went to a compounding pharmacy and they made us the formulation for our pet or a special circumstance. And so, the volume of FDA approved substances that are reformulated when there is a drug on the market, especially if it's branded, it's not supposed to be a huge amount of prescriptions. It's supposed to be for the special subsegment of population. And what we happened with the GLPs, and I mean, I've been prescribing these since 2018, around 2021, 22, more people were, there was more demand and the pharmaceutical companies couldn't keep up. So I
Hmm.
would have patients driving 7 hours to get their Zepbound filled at a pharmacy because all of the local pharmacies didn't have it and they wanted it covered by their insurance. And so we had a shortage, and then the FDA allowed an exception letting the pharmaceutical product in compounding pharmacies be available because we had many patients, their diabetes was becoming dysregulated. I couldn't find Ozempic for them or Mounjaro. And so we almost had to use compounding pharmacies because the shortages were really awful. And that cost more money to my patients. It cost more administrative burden. And then when they came back on the market, you had a lot of people who said, oh, the compounding is cheaper, it's easier, I don't have to wait for CVS to get it in stock, so I'll just stick with the compounded version. And we also saw med spas picking up on
Hmm.
this opportunity. We saw the telehealth companies picking up on this opportunity. It was a big miss, if you will, because they, Novo Nordisk and Eli Lilly, expected these drugs to completely change the market, but they couldn't keep up with supply. Now they figured out the supply.
Yeah.
And now we even have oral
Hmm.
GLPs, like oral Wegovy, and I have no problem getting these in stock. So the FDA has said, at basically the prompting of the drug companies, listen, we have an IP protection, a patent protection. This is our information, our intellectual property, to be able to brand this drug and have exclusive rights to put it on the market. That's part of the deal the FDA does when they give someone approval. They can brand it, and it costs a heck of a lot more, and it's a lot harder to get approved for a patient. So using it off label tends to be related to the how restrictive it is in cost. So here we are now. I have access to it. I also have a bunch of compounding pharmacies that were filling up clinics, and millions of people were taking the compounded version. The drug companies said that's our market. They shut them down. They have pretty much shut down most of, compounding pharmacies' capacity to legally keep on their shelves a lot of volume for these, what should be just small prescriptions, where I might prescribe something that's FDA approved, as I mentioned, through a compounding pharmacy. But if I prescribe too much, the FDA could come and audit me and say, why aren't you using the brand? Why would you use the compounded?
Okay, so I want to take a step back because
Mm-hmm.
this is great information, but it's also confusing. So when we're
Okay.
talking about peptide therapy, I feel like there's peptide therapy on top, and then there's two bars, and one branch is the FDA approved version. So back to Vyleesi, that's the FDA approved version of the PT 141. But this other branch over here is the compounding pharmacy version, which I used in nasal spray um, formula. So they're
Mm-hmm.
both they're both peptide therapy. The only difference is the FDA approval. And so when you move away from the FDA approved version and you go to the compounded version, it's not exactly the same, right? There has to be
A different
something.
dose, different formulation. So in this case, they're using it intranasally, which was not approved, but the molecule itself, subcutaneously at much higher doses, was approved. So there's some leeway where a prescribing physician who has a license to practice medicine can send a prescription for that FDA-approved molecule to a compounding pharmacy that can get the pharmaceutical product reformulated for the prescription. And that's sent in one person's name. It's not sent in batch to like a med spa that keeps it
Hmm,
on the shelves and then repackages it and sells it.
okay. Okay. There's a whole nother section of what's called the anti-aging and longevity peptides. And there's a couple in there that I'm really curious about and how you
Mhm.
think of them. One is called Semarelin, and
Dermarelin. Mhm.
yeah, so it
Dermarelin was
is,
FDA approved. So it is safe in humans. It is available at some compounding pharmacies, but again, the FDA shifts the category around. So the compounding pharmacies I work with, sometimes it's on formulary, sometimes it's not based on their interpretation of what the FDA is saying. But sermorelin is a growth hormone releasing hormone peptide, which means we naturally make growth hormone when we sleep. When we're teenagers, we make lots of growth hormone. And then as we age, it starts to go down. But growth hormone helps with our metabolism, helps with our muscle, helps with the brain, helps with healing, repair. But it's FDA approved for growth hormone deficiency. Sermorelin, there was a time where it was FDA approved. I think it was maybe in children, and it was used, but now it's not used anymore. So it's available, and thought that for some people who struggle with visceral fat and metabolism, maybe sermorelin could help them. Again, that's a physician saying, I know this is a safe molecule in humans. I want to repurpose it and try it um, for an off-label use.
Okay. And this is the one that I see marketed towards women navigating menopause a lot, because the way they
I think
market it
because it
is,
is considered safe, and so legally they can still stock it. And I think physicians, we do care. I certainly do. Tesamorelin is another growth hormone
hmm,
peptide that is FDA approved. It's FDA approved for HIV associated lipodystrophy, which means some people just really, get dad bods, if you will, taking certain medications that they need to for their HIV status, but it messes with their metabolism and all of a sudden they get really skinny fat. And so the drug's great for helping them lean out and get some muscle. And when we give it to somebody who's having some body composition issues that are not associated to HIV lipodystrophy, there may be benefit there. But again, it's an off label use.
and so I'm thinking about the menopausal woman, and I'm thinking about when she's going into her clinician's office and she's having the conversation about menopause and all the different symptoms she's navigating. The conversation shouldn't go to peptide therapy right out of the gate. Is that, do you see that as sort of the icing on the cake when all other things are established, meaning lifestyle is established? She's managing her stress, she's eating well, she's moving more, she's getting her restorative sleep on a consistent basis. Maybe she's on menopause hormone therapy, maybe she's not a candidate and she's using some other non-hormonal options. So, do you see peptide therapy as the last layer or something that's in
Mm-hmm.
conjunction with using other things?
So I think you bring up a great point because any prescriber or any online platform that says go right to peptides is
Mhm.
missing a huge part of true good medicine. And that is that we want to know, have we got a woman in front of us that, yes, her diet is in a good place. Her sleep hygiene is in a good place, her movement, her light, dark, circadian rhythm cycle, her nutrient status, her vitamin D levels, her hormone levels. I think there's so much opportunity. Why would I go? I may use a GLP in a menopausal woman who has weight loss resistance or perimenopausal as an adjunct, but it's always an adjunct to lifestyle and getting her
Hmm.
vitamin D levels right, her omega levels right, her folate levels right, helping her sleep. Because spending that much money for a product that's not well tested, that has some really significant side effect profiles, I don't think is good medicine. I think there may be good markup opportunity and profit margin, and that's why women are being told, oh, you should really take this stack. And I can tell you, because I know like the true like wholesale prices from the compounding pharmacies, the markups are obscene. And so like working with a doctor like myself, patients pay me for access to me for like I have a membership concierge model, but I don't upcharge any peptides or prescriptions I'm sending. There's I don't think that that's a good idea personally. Um, so if you came to me, Jill, and said, I want to take PT 141, I would say, okay, you've got an option here as Vyleesi. You're like, oh, I tried it. That was awful. I puked all night. Too strong, but it helps when I took it intranasally. I can prescribe it for you that way. But first, we'd be talking about other things going on for your hypoactive sexual desire disorder. And when it comes to perimenopausal, menopausal women, we know hormone therapy is safe for most women. It's completely under prescribed. Most physicians, including myself, we trained at a time where hormone therapy prescriptions were not either part of our training, part of our specialty. We were just told, honestly, if she's in her 40s, she's probably the female, fat, fertile, and frustrated was like the female, or, it's like, oh, there's another one. And, she always has gallbladder issues and she's always trying to lose weight and she can't sleep and she's always tired. And she just, doctors don't know what to do except give her an SSI, give her a little Ambien, tell her she'll get through it, do the best you can. It's probably your kids, it's probably your husband. Um, I've learned because it happened to me, it's probably your progesterone insufficiency, your estrogen fluctuations, on top of this metabolic dysfunction with, an assault on our stress access because we've got all these devices and a lot of distraction. And our kids are not as healthy as they used to be. And they
Hmm.
need us more. Our parents are not as healthy. We don't feel like ourselves. Our husbands wonder why we don't want to be
Hmm.
touched. And it just
Hmm.
starts to compound, and we can't remember, the assignment we needed to get done or deliverable for work. And it's so overwhelming. So you're vulnerable, you're like scrolling, can't sleep, and all of a sudden you see somebody who's like, ooh, they got this glow stack, or they're all buff and they did this, and all you have to do is sign up here and DM me and I'll give you the hookup. I don't know. I get it. It's really hard, but we have more. And this is why I love working with you, Jill. Like you help women figure it out, help them stay safe, and also remind them how to find the menopause trained physicians,
Yeah.
practitioners. They're out there. There's more of us. And the FDA has really been helping too. We got rid of the black box warning for estrogen. Let's go for testosterone, right? So every time I prescribe testosterone for women, it's off label,
Right.
right? And I am here to say testosterone can really help. And so I'm not against trying anything off label if I think it's safe. Where I don't have the data, I'll have a conversation and say, okay, you've been suffering so much, you're thinking about having surgery, you want to try a formulation of this or that you heard about. Let's talk about what we're going to test before and after to see if it has any benefit. Let's also check your liver enzymes, your blood pressure, other metrics to make sure. And then you can have like a medically supervised, you know, opportunity to make sure it's not causing harm. But I see it every day, especially the growth hormone ones, they cause your insulin levels to be trickier. So if you have insulin resistance and your metabolism isn't quite right, you could have a lot of fluid retention and actually not feel any better on sermorelin. You could be gaining weight and have fluid retention. And when you're in perimenopause, most women have fluid retention anyway. So
Right.
it's not a good idea.
Yeah. For those of the listeners who don't know what a stack is, can you explain that?
Oh yeah, stacks are like comes from a little bit of the bros being like, oh, I take
Hmm.
my testosterone and then I layer in my Tessa, and now they're doing the Retta, and they might do a little terzepatide, and then they'll like go into some anabolics, and so they play around with their stacks. And we don't use that in medicine. Here's your stack, but I will say it's a term. Let's say my supports for most of the time for most women might be a supplement stack or recommendation for magnesium, vitamin D, omegas,
Hmm. Hmm.
fiber. So I think it's a bit of an approach, if you will. But that's what I meant by stack. How you
Yeah.
stack it, how you move the stacks around, and it's kind of what's out there on TikTok, I think.
And there's also different delivery systems for these peptides. We mentioned the subcutaneous, so the injectables. We mentioned
Hmm.
that BPC is now has an oral option. The
Right.
nasal spray. There's also
Hmm.
powders, and this one freaks me out the most. The powders that they have to mix with, I don't even know what they're mixing it with, distilled water maybe. And I see these
Well, those
Reddit.
are the injectables, yeah, and that's why too. They're just getting the powder is supposed to be the active pharmaceutical ingredient, but we don't know what it is. I don't know. It could be talc. It have could be dirty. I think that's the biggest issue is it's not sterile. And if how you how you keep it sterile is a big deal. And compounding pharmacies that are allowed to make peptides have to be at a sterile compounding facility, so they're regulated very differently. So I work with compounding pharmacies that can't do peptides. They just do hormones. They just do pills of like low dose naltrexone. Another great example of an off-label use of a medication, naltrexone, that helps with alcohol use disorder, but at low doses, it might help the immune system. It's safe, and some people drink a heck of a lot less alcohol just on a fraction of the dose that's FDA approved.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
what I did want to say about the preparation, the powder, yeah, that's got to be research grade. No pharmacy I work with, except in the case of gonadotropin, which is Pregnal or HCG. You can get that at Walgreens as a powder, but it also comes with a sterile thing, and you have to reconstitute it yourself. Um,
Yeah, I don't know if you've ever looked on Reddit or some of these Facebook
yeah.
groups. It is nuts. It is a whole different world out there. It is a different language. They have shortened versions of talking about their stacks and you know, it
Mhm.
it's really incredible. But it's also incredibly dangerous if you ask me. I mean,
I mean,
you,
it's true. They have the right to try, though. I mean,
yeah,
I think too, kids get offered all sorts of drugs out there. I can only warn people, I don't think you should try that when you don't know what's in it. We all know a story of somebody who just thought it was one oxycodone and it turned out to be fentanyl. I think if you are working with a lab that's third party testing it and you're testing it, maybe you have a different level of risk tolerance. But as a physician, remember, I'm licensed. A lot of the people who are selling this stuff, they don't have a license that's at risk.
yeah.
I have to pay malpractice. So if I don't think they would cover me for any of this. And how would I sit there in a court of law and say, I had an FDA approved version, but I chose to take the unregulated for research purposes only to recommend to my patient? That's why you don't see most doctors recommending research
Right,
peptides. We
right.
don't have a legs to stand on, and we like data, we like things that we can count on.
Yeah. What does it say about the state of menopause care that women are even turning to these unregulated peptides rather than evidence-based hormone therapy? I mean, the conversation about menopause care, thank goodness it's now being spotlighted, but I think it's under 5% of women in the United States are taking evidence-based hormone therapy.
Right? I mean, we'll try anything when we feel bad and we can't get in to see the doctor, or we can't get our questions answered by the doctor or the prescriber if it's an NP, somebody who's there. And women, it happened to me. I mean, I had I tried anything that sounded good too. I didn't try, injecting myself with stuff, but um, I did try things just because I heard it helped somebody else feel better as a doctor, and I was overwhelmed. I just wanted to feel better. So, the Dr. Oz, he was doing what, the raspberry ketones for a while. I mean, and that's just it. You have like real doctors putting their names on supplements too. And, when they don't have to, so anytime I go to like something where pharmaceutical companies pay me, to speak on their behalf or something like that, that is discoverable, and anybody can look up a doctor and find out how much pharma money they get from drug companies.
Mm,
There's no method for how you can look up and see how much certain influencers get in supplement sales, but it's a huge business and it's totally
yeah,
unregulated.
yeah.
So you can see where there's opportunity in somebody who's just out to make money and they have nothing to lose besides getting a little flag. They don't have a medical license or a health license.
Yeah.
Back,
So what
yeah.
is the red flag? What is the red flag that a woman should look for when she walks into, she just finally got an appointment with a menopause care expert. She's
Mhm.
decided I'm going to go the cash pay route. I'm going to the clinic. She gets there, she walks in, and what is the red flag she should be looking for if there's any there?
I think if they're not spending time listening to you, talking to you, even getting some idea of your labs, your vital signs, that's flag number one. Okay. Number two is if they're telling you about pellets and just about supplements and they're not talking about things, or they should, and we're trained to, and I think it makes sense, try the thing that's tested on women. If it's an estrogen patch or a spray or a gel that you can get at your local pharmacy, um, I don't need to go to a compounded version if I can get her feeling better with something that's FDA approved. To me, that just makes more sense. Now, if she needs a special formulation, we'll go to it, especially with the pellets. That's, I think, really a flag for me because somebody who's naive to hormones and that's just the only option they're given, then you're giving them often super physiologic doses that can't be adjusted. This pellet is in her, we can't take it out. It's a foreign body. If she, has an accident, breaks a leg, all of a sudden she has, levels of hormones that could put her at risk for a blood clot, and we can't take that out. And you can see the pellet companies have been sued for circumstances like that. So I also think too, the peptides, they're not the first line, you know.
Yeah.
I think you really want to have somebody who's in really good health. And the idea of stacks is something we don't do in medicine. We like to test like one intervention at a time.
Mhm.
I personally prefer that too. I want women to know this is what it feels like to take progesterone. This is what it feels like to take estrogen. And then you get a better idea of what symptoms align with which intervention. So you can also customize for yourself um, what these molecules do for your body. If they're
Yeah.
hormones, peptides, um, yeah.
I would add that your first reaction to the waiting room, right? Is the waiting room
Mhm.
full of posters of peptide therapy and pellets and all the like what people think of as bells and whistles, right?
Mhm.
Is it the
Mhm.
vaginal laser poster? Is it,
Oh yeah, yeah.
all the
Mhm.
things that are going to cost you more money? Your insurance is definitely not going to cover any of this. And it's
Mhm.
not just, and you said you have a right to try. You have a right to try anything and make any decision. But the red flag is, and this is something I help my clients understand and be prepared for when they go to see the clinician for the first time. Stay focused. Walk in there with a list of your top 3 to 5 questions because you're not going to have a ton of time. Stay focused on what you're there for. Keep it basic and have the blinders on. Don't pay attention to the shelves of all of the private label supplements and the posters of all these extra things that are going to cost you thousands of dollars. You can always go
Right.
there later, but don't go there in the
Right.
beginning.
I think that's great advice, having a list of questions. I think
Yeah.
using AI to help you make those
Mm-hmm.
question lists is great. I love when my patients have questions. You know, I want to answer all of them. I want to understand how I can better communicate and understand what they're feeling and getting to a plan that makes sense. That also works in their budget, works with their insurance issues. I, that's a big part of it. I can prescribe all sorts of regimens, but if she's not going to fill the prescription because she can't afford it, that's tricky. We see that with a lot of, we have the E string, the vaginal, and there's so many options out there. And it's tricky. And you have physician preference. Some physicians just really tend to prefer a certain formulation. I know some physicians, they really prefer the compounded as first line for hormone therapy. It's not how I practice, but I also honor that that's within their right to practice, and they have the right to do that. I don't think doctors should be told how to practice medicine when they're prescribing safely from regulated compounding pharmacies.
Is there a trusted resource with reliable information about peptide therapy that's being marketed, to the midlife woman and beyond? Maybe not so specific
Good
to us, but
question.
just where can someone go to really learn to understand what this whole peptide therapy world is? And I'm not talking about the FDA approved ones like insulin and GLP.
Hmm.
I'm talking about all the other ones that we're hearing about.
Well, I think the first question is just what we're talking about. Is it for research purposes only? If
Mm,
it's not, and it's on label or off label but approved, then how are you a candidate for the off label role? A resource online for peptides? Gosh, I haven't found one, but I would also say most peptides that are in this like gray market, we don't have a lot of human data. We might have some human data in other countries. They just haven't been replicated, you know. So I think the level of nuance it takes to learn about molecules that the FDA hasn't even, said are safe. And let's be clear, there's a list, the RFK list or whatever it is.
hmm
That's a list where the FDA said we don't have human safety data. I mean, how many times does the FDA come out and say specifically avoid these things because we know a lot of people are out there taking it and you're doing it at your own risk? They do that with other supplements and this or that, but to really do this collectively, I don't blame the skeptics for saying, well, they want to destroy the market that used to be with the compounding pharmacies. That's a fair concern, but it is a market that I think we should have regulation. And so
Yeah,
if you're getting a prescription, it's either for research purposes only or it's a true prescription in your name. And so
right.
just like when you pick up a medication at the pharmacy, there's a whole like list of, everything about how that drug was studied, every little possible thing that could go left on the websites. Maybe they have a few disclaimers, but it's mostly for, not getting sued and just I've looked at a lot of these websites where women can buy stuff online, and it always in the little small print will say not for human use.
hmm Yeah. Some people don't want to see that, so they won't look for it,
Yeah,
right? So
it's
for the
true.
woman
Yeah.
who is really frustrated with her menopause journey and lack of care she is receiving, and she feels like she's just not getting answers before she turns to peptide therapy, what do you want her to know about where she can turn for support?
I think we have trusted resources. If it's menopause.org, finding a menopause practitioner. Most cities will have an academic hospital that has gynecologists who are up to date now with the guidelines. But sometimes it takes word of mouth. We also have online telehealth platforms where you're seeing physicians and practitioners that prescribe on label first. If they're like making you sign up for a membership and it's renewable and they're sending you vials in the mail, somewhere it's probably saying this isn't for human use, or if it is for human use, it's a really unconventional approach. And most women we know get symptom resolution if it's weight loss resistance, if it's can't sleep, don't feel like myself, mood disorders, skin, hair changes, musculoskeletal syndrome issues. You could see where peptides sound amazing because it seems to, there's one for all of that. But we also have FDA approved options for all of those symptoms I just described too. And they're getting better and better every day. As a menopause and obesity specialist, that's my wheelhouse. I prescribe, these things and they work great. They work great.
Yeah.
It probably is a little more expensive to source your tirzepatide, semaglutide, what is Wegovy, Ozempic, Mounjaro, Zepbound, but the the prices are coming down all the time. And now we have two orals, oral Wegovy
Hmm.
and oral orforglipron. Foundea just came out,
Hmm.
approved on April Fool's Day. And so
Yeah.
my Eli Lilly rep just sent me, how to order it. It's $150 a month for tablets, so you don't have to refrigerate it. And I think the prices will only get lower. And we're already seeing some of the online big forums say no more compounding. We're getting better prices through the pharma companies.
Yeah, I think the takeaway here is before you turn to peptide therapy online without any guidance or medical doctor helping you walk that journey, to know that there's a plethora of options for your symptoms. There are solutions. Yeah, the Menopause Society is a great place. Ishwish is a great place to look as well.
That's right. Yeah.
But all the associations as well, like the American Lipid Association, the American
Hmm.
Heart Association, all the chronic disease states have associations, and you can always call them and ask. I have done that myself. I found my
Good.
preventive cardiologist that way. I called
Yep.
a lab and I said, "Who do you recommend in Chicago that looks at this?" So there, you just have to think out of the box and be creative and take time, because this does take time. There are no quick fixes to this. And by the way, peptide therapy is not a quick fix. We didn't really talk about the placebo effect, but it is a real thing for sure. But Dr. Catherine, thank you so much for
Mhm.
coming on again and helping us understand just how to navigate this journey, because it is just an absolute mess out there.
And we got to get through it because the future of
Yeah.
peptide medicine is awesome. I'm
Yeah.
really excited about what's coming. I can't wait. So we have more studies and trials, and I'm especially excited about retatrutide that will be
Hmm.
available soon. And I haven't found one person I can't get to their goals without it. Um, but I'm also looking forward to having more tools. And I think what you're doing to help navigate women to the right spot. Find your trusted people and know
Yes.
that I would also say follow the money. Like ask who's paying you. Like, what
Right.
are your best interests being looked after?
Right.
Because usually there's some private equity money behind these big things, or
Yep.
there's just somebody who doesn't have any ethics at all and wants to make a few bucks on what's trending.
100%.
Hmm.
And where can people find you and follow you online?
Sure. I'm at Catherine Johnson, MD, on Insta, also at Precision Medical Care, and the website is myprecisionmedicalcare.com.
Great. Thank you so much. All right,
You're
everyone,
welcome.
thanks for tuning in. I hope you're walking away with some golden nuggets on peptide therapy, and we'll see you next time. Thank you for joining me. I hope you enjoyed the podcast. Lifestyle changes can be hard and overwhelming to make. By building your support team of functional medicine doctors, therapists, and health coaches, you can reach your optimal health goals. Be sure to check out my other podcasts. Until we meet again, stay healthy.